Hi, it's Loren Lockman from the Tanglewood Wellness Center. I've been asked to speak a little bit about fermented foods. Many of us have been brought up to think that fermentation is a beneficial process, that fermented foods are healthy foods. And it was pointed out that many cultures, if not all of them, many cultures have a practice of fermenting various things. And so the question is this something that's really beneficial to us? What's my take on it? I'm gonna bring you back, and for you guys that are here with me, you've heard this numerous times. You know, you may be watching my video for the first time, but whenever I'm looking at a question, I'm trying to figure something out, I'll always ask myself, what would happen if I lived in the tropical jungle? Now, we're tropical animals. We can only live naked 12 months of the year in the tropics. So if I was actually living not in a building surrounded by tropical jungle, but actually in the jungle, like other species, what would happen? What would I do? So I'm living in the tropical jungle. I walk around and I pick up a pineapple and I bite into it and it's fermented. Does this ever happen to you? What have you done? Spit it out.
Yeah, sometimes I spit it out.
Yeah, I usually spit it out. Bite into, for me, if it's fermented, I spit it out because it tastes bad. You did that last night with mango.
Yeah, it was yesterday's mango.
Yesterday's mango was a little bit far gone, and that's what happens. There's a continuum, right? So fruit goes from being rock hard and green when it's unripe to eventually being a pile of goo, which is 50% alcohol because the sugar converts to alcohol if you leave it alone. So somewhere between those two extremes, there's a window of time when you can eat it and it tastes good and you want it, but you immediately tasted the mango and said, no, right? And your taste buds are now perfect because you fasted for 21 days, you've completely regenerated them, so you can taste things that you've probably never tasted before or haven't tasted since you were a little tiny baby. Depending on what you were fed as a baby. I mean, if you were breastfed and your mother was consuming a typical diet, your taste buds would have been bastardized by imperfect breast milk, because capsaicin from hot foods affects the baby. That means it affects the baby's taste buds. So some people are literally going to taste things they've never ever tasted before after fasting long enough with clean, completely regenerated taste buds and only simple, pure, perfect, optimal foods. A lot of people would have eaten that mango and said, this is fine. I took a bite of it. She brought it back in. I took a bite and said, yeah, he's right. But it was just barely beginning to ferment. But the natural instinct with a clean system is, yeah, no thanks. We don't want that. That's what we would naturally do. So why would we be attracted to fermented foods? Well, first of all, most fermented food, like sauerkraut, typically, doesn't have to be, I suppose, but typically includes salt. So salt is highly addictive, and people become addicted to that. In fact, there are probably other things that are manufactured in the process that become addictive to us as well. But if we look at this from the other direction, so that's why the fact that we've been eating these things, we may want to keep eating them. We may be conditioned to eat them, both because of our beliefs about them and because of what's actually happening in the body from a physical perspective. Typically, a clean system, though, isn't going to want those things. So you're likely to find, after fasting, not really attracted to it. But it still begs the question, why do all these various cultures, why have they always done this? If it's not healthy, why would we be doing it? Well, let me ask you a similar question. If meat, because you're a vegan, aren't you? You're a vegan? You guys don't believe in eating animal products. Why have people for years been eating animal products if they're not good for us? Every culture eats animal products. Maybe that means we should eat animal products too. It's the same exact logic, isn't it? Am I missing something? I think it's the same. Let me suggest what I believe happened. How did we wind up eating fermented products? Well, you ever been to Korea? I haven't. I've been to Japan, though. Korea is further north. It's colder. Y'all have seen MASH? It snows there in the winter, right? It's not a tropical climate. It's a cold, it's a temperate climate where it gets quite cold in the wintertime. What grows in places that are cold enough for snow, what grows in the winter? What edible foods are available? Say again, cabbage grows. But cabbage, like all the cruciferous vegetables, is primarily cellulose and is notoriously known for one thing. Most people that eat raw cruciferous vegetables produce a lot of methane. What am I saying? People get gas when they eat these things. Why? Because we can't digest cellulose. So you eat raw cabbage, you get a lot of gas. That should be telling us something. That's a message. So for those of you who are familiar with my guidelines, my what is food guidelines, you already know if you need to process something to be able to make it food, it's not really food for us. It wasn't designed to be food for us. But we were never designed to be living in places that have snow on the ground in the wintertime. We can't do that in our natural costumes, which are nothing. Birthday suits. Can't do that. Okay, we're not cold-dwelling species. We have to maintain tropical temperatures. So if you're living in a place where there's snow on the ground and you don't want to eat animals, you don't have very many choices. I mean, again, let's talk about before global shipping, before you could get pineapples at the North Pole, right? When all you got is what's ever there. Well, if you're living in Korea, you got cabbage and you can't really digest it, maybe what you're going to do is, maybe someone, how they thought about it, who knows? But someone realized at some point, and in fact, people all over the world realized somehow, if we allow this stuff to ferment, the bacteria do a lot of the work of digestion, and now we can actually digest it. And so the Koreans have, for eons, eaten kimchi, which is a fermented cabbage meal product. Okay? Why? Because they can't really eat the cabbage unless they ferment it. I mean, they could cook it, but again, cooking, we don't really think of cooking as a luxury. But in some places, cooking was always a luxury. Anybody here been to Nebraska? What's most prominent? What's the most prominent feature about Nebraska for you when you went there? Corn. Corn? Okay. Coming from the East Coast, have you been there? No?
No trees.
There's no trees.
Yeah.
I grew up in places that were forests, trees everywhere. You go to Nebraska, you go to Kansas, you're looking at grasslands. There's no trees. Fire was a luxury. And, it may well be in Korea, maybe they didn't have a lot of fuel. And so when cooking becomes a luxury, this is a way to create vast quantities of something that keeps for a long time in a cold climate without having to cook it and have it be edible. And so the same thing is true. My heritage is from the Ukraine. Most of my ancestry comes from that part of the world. And in Russia and the Ukraine, they have fermented cabbage products as well, right? It's really, it's a slightly different dish, but it's the same exact idea. The Inuit living up in Alaska, northern Canada, what do they do? Well, what do they have? I mean, there's no cabbage up there. There's nothing except animal products. What do? They would take their fish and animal products, whatever it was seal meat, a walrus meat, whatever they could get. Because, again, if they didn't kill stuff, they weren't going to eat anything for months at a time. So what would they do? They would dig a hole in the ice, they'd put the stuff in there, and they'd come back 4 or 5 days, a week later, when it was a fermented, rotted, disgusting mess. And then they'd eat it because they could digest it that way. They couldn't really digest it very well until it was all fermented. So I suspect that fermentation came into common use in places where cooking was a luxury and nothing much was growing in the wintertime. And that's why people started doing this. You and I have no need to consume fermented products. Okay? Just as if we were walking along and picked up a fermented mango, we would almost certainly spit it out. There's no reason to be introducing something into your system that's not in the perfect condition your body wants it to be in. So my advice to you would be to eliminate fermented products from your diet. The question is, yes, we may be tropical animals originally, but people have been living for eons in non-tropical climates. Certainly their bodies would have adapted by now for those conditions rather than for tropical conditions. And I would say absolutely not true. There's been virtually no adaptation. Your body still requires a 95 to 96 degree temperature Fahrenheit at the center of your torso, on your skin. You cannot survive in those climates without layers of clothing. There's been no adaptation. I mean, how come, like bears and wolves, we can't run around naked in the wintertime if we've adapted to the climate? We haven't. We're tropical animals. We still need to be in tropical climate. And we create tropical climate wherever we go. Okay? You create a micro-tropical climate inside your clothing wherever you are. And if the clothing's not enough, you know, there are certain places in the world where you're not likely to spend a lot of time outside the coldest months of the year. I mentioned a friend of mine who lives in a place where it's regularly 30, 40 below zero in the wintertime. This is up in the Yukon, northern Canada. You can't have any skin exposed for more than a few seconds before it's frostbitten when it's that cold. We're clearly not, you know, there's been no adaptation to that climate whatsoever. So not only are you likely to have lots of layers of clothing on, but you're likely to be inside a warm car and inside a warm building much of the time.
Living in a very cold place, what you want to warm you up is a warm soup, not like a cold mango. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. I understand. The question is, yes, but living in a cold place, don't you need warm food to warm you up? The answer is no. Warm food doesn't warm you up, not for very long. It actually has the opposite effect. It has a short-term warming effect and a long-term cooling effect as it requires more of the body's energy. But there's a whole other talk there we can do, which looks at the fallacy of, it's not even a fallacy, it's comparing what's happening. Overall, what are the impacts of raw and cooked food on temperature in various climates? I think what you'll see is there's no advantage to eating cooked food under any circumstances in any climate. You know, and I mean, do you really want to be consuming something that's poisonous to you to get warm? Wouldn't it make more sense to put on a sweater? You're in a tropical climate all the time. It doesn't matter. You could be walking down the street in the Yukon when it's 40 below zero. It is 95 to 96 degrees at your torso, because if it's not, you don't survive very long. We're warm-blooded animals. We do not have the ability to regulate the body's temperature. We must be in the climate that maintains it for us. And if we're not, then we have to create that climate for ourselves. So the fact is, every human being lives in a tropical climate because it's the only place we can live. We can't live anywhere else. There has been no adaptation that I'm aware of, that I've able to see. We still live in tropical climates. And because of that, consuming a tropical style diet, the same diet that our bodies are designed for, works no matter where we are. I have clients who live in Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, nobody in Greenland that I know of, northern Scotland, northern Ireland, places that are extremely cold, up in the Yukon, up in Alaska. I've got clients in all these places that thrive eating fruit and salad, no matter how cold it is. Okay? Again, I would encourage people to stop attempting to warm themselves up with hot foods and beverages, which don't actually work long-term anyway, and damage the body.
No, it's like the body's desire. So is it a false message that it gives you?
Well, the body does not say, give me a cup of hot chocolate. That's you. That's your ego. That's your memory. That's your strategy for getting over the cold. But that your body doesn't interact with you that way. So it's not really saying that. Your body doesn't want to be cold. Absolutely. But what would be better would be to stop putting yourself in situations where you are that cold. And for many people, it has nothing to do with the ambient temperature. It has more to do with how the body is responding to the temperature. So if you're going to eat fish, which might well be spoiled, and most fish is, you go buy fish in a grocery store in the U.S., it's so full of bacteria, you wouldn't touch it. Did you know that 75% of USDA chicken inspectors said they would never eat chicken, knowing what they know. I mean, animal products in the U.S., they are filthy, covered with all kinds of nasty stuff. Here's an idea. Don't eat that stuff. Then you don't have to worry about counteracting all the nasty crap in it. We don't need to do that. We don't need to implant healthy bacteria in our bodies. We don't need to eat kefir or yogurt to get or sauerkraut to get the beneficial bacteria. All we need to do is get out of the body's way and allow those bacteria which are already present to flourish. That's all we need to do. You guys have already done that. You've done it now. Don't go screw it up. Okay? You start putting some of the stuff in your system, you are likely to upset the balance. You don't need this. There's no need for it at all. Show me another species on the planet that ferments their food, that's making kefir. No other species uses another animal's dairy in the first place. We don't need it. It's, what we want to do, remember, is we started out, all of us, with a completely useless vehicle that would never get us anywhere if where we wanted to go was health. It was never going to get us there. But we have a new vehicle. It's like, we need to stop looking back at the old vehicle, but I like that vehicle. It was so pretty. It was comfortable. I'm used to it. Okay, but, it's like you change cars, you let the old one go, you move on. It's time to change vehicles if what you want is to really take your health to a new level. Let's stop trying to fix a broken down vehicle. Okay? I hope that's clear. Thanks.